Hello and welcome to this module where we will provide a brief overview of the anatomy and physiology of the circulatory system, also known as the cardiovascular system. It is not possible to cover all the details of this body system, so please use this video to supplement any learning materials assigned by your instructor. In this module, we will discuss the anatomy and physiology of the circulatory system, including the composition and function of blood, the heart, blood vessels, and the blood groups. Discuss the concepts of the cardiac output, stroke volume, preload, afterload, and systemic vascular resistance, and discuss the Frank-Starling mechanism. The circulatory system is primarily responsible for ensuring adequate perfusion to all parts of the body. This means that oxygen, glucose, and other important nutrients are transported to all cells in the body in adequate amounts, and any waste products are removed from the cells and excreted from the body. The circulatory system also helps to maintain homeostasis of fluid, acid-base balance, and temperature. Additionally, the circulatory system distributes the components of the immune system throughout the body to protect against infection and disease, and to circulate the components of the clotting system to stop bleeding. To maintain adequate perfusion, the circulatory system must have its three components working properly. Number one, the heart, which is the pump. Number two, the blood vessels, which are the container. And number three, the blood, which is the fluid that fills the system. These three components form the perfusion triangle. If any one component malfunctions, the patient runs the risk of going into shock or a state of inadequate tissue perfusion. For those who are new to the anatomy of the heart, I've made this diagram so you can easily recreate it in your notes. Deoxygenated blood returns from the body to the vena cava. Deoxygenated blood from the upper part of the body is returned via the superior vena cava, while deoxygenated blood from the lower part of the body is returned through the inferior vena cava. The vena cava returns deoxygenated blood to the right atrium. When the right atrium contracts, blood is pumped through a one-way valve called the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, blood is pumped through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery, which carries the deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Waste products are removed and oxygen is replaced in the blood. From the lungs, the freshly oxygenated blood flows through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium of the heart. As the left atrium contracts, blood flows through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. The left ventricle is the strongest ventricle of the heart because when it contracts, it sends blood through the aortic valve into the aorta and out to all parts of the body. The image on the left is an illustration of the heart which more accurately reflects what the heart looks like. The flow of blood through the heart is the same as we just discussed on the last slide. The image on the right illustrates that the heart is a double pump that circulates blood to either the pulmonary or the systemic circuit. The right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood from the body and pumps it to the lungs, where waste products such as carbon dioxide are exhaled and replaced with oxygen. This is the pulmonary circuit. The freshly oxygenated blood is sent back to the left side of the heart, which pumps it out to all parts of the body. This is the systemic circuit. The atria contract together to fill the ventricles. There are valves between the atria and ventricles to prevent backflow through the circuit. These valves are called the atrioventricular valves and are named by the number of cusps each valve has. The tricuspid valve between the right atrium and ventricle has 3 cusps, and the bicuspid valve between the left atrium and ventricle has 2. The bicuspid valve is also called the mitral valve. Both ventricles also contract together. When the right ventricle contracts, it sends blood through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery or the pulmonary circuit, as illustrated in the image on the right. When the left ventricle contracts, it pumps blood through the aortic valve into the aorta and out to all parts of the body, or the systemic circuit, as also illustrated. When the ventricles contract, they are said to be in systole because the pressure in the arteries is at its highest point. When the ventricles are at rest and being filled by the atria, they are in diastole. Heart muscle has 2 types of cells, electrical and mechanical. The electrical cells initiate and conduct electrical impulses across the heart muscle that stimulates the mechanical cells in each chamber of the heart to contract and pump the blood forward. The blood vessels make up the container portion of the perfusion triangle. By the time we reach adulthood, we have approximately 60,000 miles of blood vessels in our body. The image on the right illustrates a few of the larger and commonly known blood vessels. There are 3 types of blood vessels in the human body: arterial vessels, which always carry blood away from the heart, venous vessels that return blood to the heart, and the capillaries where nutrients and cellular waste products are exchanged between the blood and tissue. When freshly oxygenated blood is pumped to the systemic circuit from the left ventricle, it exits through the aorta, which is the largest artery in the body. The aorta carries blood to the arteries, which branch into smaller vessels called arterioles. At the cellular level, arterioles connect to capillaries, where oxygen is offloaded to the cells and cellular waste products such as carbon dioxide is onloaded. The other side of the capillary bed connects to the venules, which are the smallest vessels of the venous system. Venules connect to larger veins, which brings the blood back to the inferior or superior vena cava and into the right atrium. The image on the left illustrates what a capillary bed would look like at the microscopic level. You'll notice that on the arterial side of the capillary bed, these microscopic vessels have precapillary sphincters that can control the blood flow from the arterioles into the capillary bed. This is how our body can redirect oxygenated blood where it is needed most. When deoxygenated blood is pumped from the right ventricle into the pulmonary circuit, it goes through the pulmonary artery and into the pulmonary capillaries in the lungs. This is where oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange takes place. The oxygenated blood returns to the heart via the pulmonary vein. So regardless of whether we are discussing the systemic or pulmonary circuit, arteries always go away from the heart. The blood in the arterial system is under higher pressure than the venous system. As a result, arterial blood will always flow forward, but there are one-way valves throughout the venous system that ensures the blood continues to flow in the correct direction back to the heart after leaving the capillaries. The blood is the fluid portion of the perfusion triangle. Blood is comprised of plasma, which is the fluid portion, and the formed elements, which are cells carried to all parts of the body in the plasma. The formed elements include the red blood cells, or erythrocytes, which contain hemoglobin that carries oxygen to all cells in the body, white blood cells, or leukocytes, which are responsible for fighting infection, and platelets that are responsible for clotting. The image here shows the total composition of blood. The amount of blood circulating within an individual depends upon their size and weight, but the average human adult has about 5 liters of circulating blood. Cardiac output is defined as the amount of blood that is pumped by the ventricles in 1 minute. Cardiac output is determined by multiplying the heart rate by the stroke volume. The heart rate is the number of cardiac contractions per minute, and the stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped by the ventricle in a single heartbeat. If a patient has a heart rate of 80 per minute and a stroke volume of 70 milliliters, the cardiac output would be 5,600 milliliters per minute, or 5.6 liters per minute. Normal cardiac output for an average adult is between 5 and 6 liters per minute. Factors that affect stroke volume include preload and afterload. Preload is the amount of blood ready to be pumped when the ventricles contract in their next cardiac cycle. Afterload is the force against which the ventricles must contract to eject blood. Any condition that increases resistance requires a greater afterload to pump the blood. Stroke volume is ultimately dependent upon the difference between the end diastolic volume, or EDV, and the end systolic volume, or ESV. At the end of atrial contraction and just prior to ventricular contraction, the ventricles contain approximately 130 mLs of blood. This is the EDV. The stroke volume will normally be in the range of 70 to 80 milliliters. Since ventricular systole began with an end diastolic volume of approximately 130 milliliters of blood, this means that there is still 50 to 60 milliliters of blood remaining in the ventricle following contraction. This is the ESV. The 3 primary factors affecting stroke volume are: number 1, the stretch on the ventricles prior to contraction, or preload; number 2, the force of strength of the contraction, or contractility; and number 3, the force the ventricles must generate to pump blood against the resistance in the vessels, or afterload. This table shows us disease processes or situations where these 3 factors can increase or decrease the stroke volume. Anything that can improve end diastolic volume, such as quick filling time or an increased venous return, will improve preload and stroke volume. A unique characteristic of cardiac muscle is that when it is stretched, it contracts with a greater force, a property called the Frank-Starling mechanism, or Starling's law. An example of this concept would be inflating a balloon. If you put a little air in the balloon and release the stem, the air will escape with little force. If you inflate the balloon as much as possible and let go of the stem, the air exits with more force. The cardiac muscles in the ventricle work the same way. From a cardiac contractility standpoint, anything that decreases end systolic volume will increase stroke volume. Afterload is influenced by peripheral vascular resistance, which depends upon the size of the vascular system. The greater the afterload, the harder the ventricle must work to pump the blood. Blood typing is based on whether certain proteins or antigens are present on red blood cells. Blood typing is done to ensure compatibility and prevent medical complications during blood transfusions or blood component replacement. A hemolytic transfusion reaction is a serious complication that can occur after a blood transfusion. The reaction occurs when the red blood cells given during the transfusion are destroyed by the person's immune system. This process is called hemolysis and may have potential life-threatening complications. Blood is grouped according to the ABO blood typing system, which includes the four blood types A, B, AB, or O. The table here illustrates the components of the ABO system. Type A blood contains red blood cells with type A antigens on their surface and anti-B antibodies circulating in the blood. Type B blood contains B surface antigens on the red blood cell and anti-A antibodies circulating in the blood. Type AB blood contains both A and B antigens on the red blood cells, but the blood has no circulating ABO antibodies. Type O has no A or B antigens on the surface of the red blood cells, but does contain both anti-A and anti-B antibodies in the blood. Since there are no surface antigens on the red blood cells of type O individuals, this blood type is considered the universal donor because it can be given to anyone regardless of their blood type. A person with type AB blood can receive blood from any donor without having a reaction because type AB blood has no circulating antibodies. Thus, an AB individual is a universal recipient. Another way blood cells may be classified is by Rh factor. Blood contains a secondary antigen known as the Rh antigen, which is named after rhesus monkeys where they were first identified. People who have Rh factors in their blood are called Rh positive, and folks without these factors are called Rh negative. Rh negative individuals will form antibodies against Rh factor if they receive Rh positive blood. The second time this individual is exposed to the Rh antigen, a severe hemolytic reaction may occur. An individual with Rh positive blood can receive both Rh positive and Rh negative transfusions, but those with Rh negative can only receive Rh negative blood. Rh factor becomes important during pregnancy when an Rh positive mom is pregnant with an Rh negative baby. The Rh factor is combined with the ABO typing, so an individual with type O blood who's Rh positive will be referred to as being O positive. Conversely, an individual with O negative blood has type O blood and is Rh negative. So to summarize the key takeaways from this slide, if you have type A blood, you can only receive types A and O blood. If you have type B blood, you can only receive types B and O blood. If you have type AB blood, you can receive types A, B, AB, or O blood. If you have type O blood, you can only receive type O blood. If you are Rh positive, you can receive either Rh positive or Rh negative blood. If you are Rh negative, you can only receive Rh negative blood. The cardiac conduction system consists of 6 components: the sinoatrial or SA node, atrioventricular or AV node, bundle of His, right and left bundle branches, and the Purkinje fibers. The SA node serves as the heart's primary pacemaker and initiates a pulse at a rate of 60 to 100 beats per minute. Impulses originating in the SA node spread through the atria via the Bachmann bundle and along the internodal pathways to the AV node. After a brief delay at the AV node, the impulses travel down the bundle of His to the right and left bundle branches and into the Purkinje network of the ventricle. The electrical impulse conducted by the pacemaker cells causes depolarization of the myocardial cells, leading to muscle contraction. Myocardial cells require a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients because the heart never stops to rest. To support this requirement, oxygenated blood reaches the heart through the coronary arteries, which branch off the aorta just above the leaflets of the aortic valve. The coronary arteries are the first vessels that receive blood after left ventricular contraction. Because the coronary arteries are compressed during ventricular systole, they only fill during ventricular diastole. This brings us to the end of this presentation. Here we see the learning objectives for this module. Can you demonstrate each of these objectives? If not, consider going back to review any content that you struggled with. Thank you for watching this video.